Welcome to our first webinar from Beyond the Box initiative. My name is Anna Mombiedro. I am an architect and school neuropsychologist, and today we're going to learn how neuroscience is redefining school design. Are you ready to start? Yeah? Okay, so at Kidzink, I'm Director of Applied Research, which means that my role is to make sure that all our projects are based on scientific research, especially on the merging of neuropsychology and architecture. Today, you're here with us as part of Kidzink, and what we do is that we design learning environments from concept to delivery. We take care of everything that has to do with learning environments. We're one team, we're distributed all around the world, and we take care of everything a school needs to become a learning environment. We do from the design of a piece of furniture to the execution of a whole building. We actually have many different teams. We take care of the wayfinding, we take care of the design of the furniture, the strategy. We're working on research, and of course we execute all the ideas that we create when it comes to learning architecture. But here today, we are on this very first webinar to learn about how neuroscience and architecture are brought together to create buildings, to create schools. The first thing we will learn about is what is neuroarchitecture and how it is applied to school design. The second thing we will learn about is why the space is the third teacher. The third thing we will learn about is what is the enriched environment model, that some of you may have heard of it already. And the fourth thing is that how all these things that I'm going to share with you in this lesson, which is the unification of neuroscience and architecture, is transformed into all budgets learning environments. But before we start, and I always like making this question, have you ever heard of neuroarchitecture? Can you raise your digital hand so we can see how many of you have heard this word before? Okay, so I make this question because we're in 2026. Back in 2020, 2019, almost nobody have heard about this field. And 5 years later, 6 years later, it is becoming a trend. And this is one of the things that I want to share with you today. Neuroarchitecture, which can seem to be a trend, it's actually not a trend. It's a scientific field that it's being studied in many different universities, and we've got a lot of scientific evidence about this field. And this is this is the core of today's webinar. So what is neuroarchitecture? What is it? What actually is it? And how can we take it into school design and into architecture? So neuroarchitecture comes from cognitive neuroscience. Some people think it comes from architecture, but it doesn't. It's got the word architecture because it actually explains how the nervous system is connected to the environment. And what it does as a field, it focuses the study, it studies the relationship between spatial attributes and human cognition. Some spatial attributes come, of course, from architecture because we study the light, the proportions, the shapes, the patterns, the presence of nature. So all these things are decisions made in the realm of architecture and design, but they have to be linked together to human cognition, to what happens to navigation, what happens to creativity, to memory, to attention. Okay, so neuroarchitecture is the integration of these two realms, some parts of neuroscience and some parts of architecture. And we use this to explore how the built environment impacts humans. And as I said before, there is a lot of scientific evidence about it. Sometimes people ask me, how architecture and neuroscience are actually connected. So, well, we can understand that architecture is the tangible part of the world we inhabit. Architecture, when we talk about architecture, we imagine that we just talk about the walls on the glass or the flooring or the ceiling or the volumes, which that's the outcome of architecture. But actually, that outcome, those volumes, those proportions, those materials, what they do is that they create stimuli. They provide stimuli, sensory stimuli to the user. And those stimuli are received by the organs of our body. So the light goes to our skin and it warms our skin. It's not only about temperature, it's what happens in our skin, okay? And this, our organs, the organs of our body, send information to our nervous system, to our central nervous system, which is our brain and our brainstem, and to our peripheral nervous system. And the information goes in and out, okay? Actually, to be more precise, sensory information goes into the body and the body releases motor information. In neuroarchitecture experiments, what is measured is these neurophysiological responses the body has to the spatial attributes. Okay, I'll dive a little bit more into this. Nowadays, we've got two different kinds of neuroarchitecture. The most important one is what we call the experimental neuroarchitecture, which is what is studied in the laboratories of universities. And in experimental neuroarchitecture, scientists measure the impact the space has on human performance. They use tools from neuroscience and psychology to measure human performance, okay? And what they do is that they publish in journals and in books, and they actually generate knowledge. And that knowledge is the one we use to produce what's called applied neuroarchitecture, which happens in architecture studios. So we gather information from the research and we bring it in a systematic and organized way into the design process, which is what we're talking about today. Okay? And very often people ask, what does applied neuroarchitecture look like? And actually, it doesn't look very different because the way the architecture look is the role of the designers. You know, creativity is unleashed if you produce applied neuroarchitecture. So what does actually change? Well, neuroarchitecture allows us to evaluate how far scientific evidence has informed the architecture project. So for us at Kidzink, neuroarchitecture, applied neuroarchitecture, help us ensure that the key aspects of the human experience are not missed. So we take care of well-being through the application of specific scientific evidence from scientific journals and papers that we will share some of them with you today. Okay? Now we're talking about the design of schools from early years to university. And the key aspect of all these buildings is learning. Learning is something absolutely wonderful of the human being. I don't know if you knew that we learn all our life. Like we're all our life learning. The only difference is that it changes the speed of our learning, and this is due to our brain plasticity and how easy it is to transform our wiring, the wire of the brain, okay? But we always learn. So all spaces are learning spaces actually. And we don't decide consciously when we're learning and when we're not, okay? I don't know if any of you knows, and you can write it in the chat, who said the sentence that the space is the third teacher? Do you know who said that? Can you type it in the chat? So the space is actually the third teacher. But why is the space a third teacher? This was actually said by Loris Malaguchi, the founder of Reggio Emilia philosophy. And I'm going to explain you why. Very often when we think about neuroscience, we think about neurons, just neurons. But neurons are connected through synapses with other neurons, and they create schemes of neurons. And these schemes create networks. And all our neuronal networks, because we've got neurons all our body, okay? Our body has neurons all over the place. Actually, well, now there are many studies that are studying how the brain-gut axis is really important to our cognition and our behavior, okay? So we've got neurons all over our body. And actually, this neuronal network that we've got defining our body and the way we behave is connected to the environment. It has to be connected to the environment, because if we remove the environment from the body, our nervous system is not going to work. And that's why we call this the architecture of learning. And what happens is that the environment is an extension of our body. Do you play any sports? Do you play tennis? Do you play cricket or table tennis? Or do you draw? Anything we use with our body, if we are using something with our hands, like a racket, or if we are rollerblading, okay, those elements become part of our body. They change our homunculus, okay? We've got our somatosensory cortex here in our brains, and these somatosensory cortex, it changes slightly when we use tools, because the body adapts to the environment, okay? And that's the way our environment and our body are connected. When we understand this, the meaning of classroom changes completely because of the elements we've got around, okay? Now, we talk about the architecture of learning, and I'm sharing with you how the environment comes together with the body to create a unified thing that actually makes learning possible. But there is something really important when it comes to design, and it's to understand that a 12-year-old is not a bigger version of a 6-year-old. We cannot just make a classroom slightly bigger or bigger furniture. It's not about that, because there are different needs. These beautiful illustrations, by the way, are from our book, Beyond the Box, and we depicted how when we're younger, we have different ways of thinking and understanding the world than when we're older, okay? So as our brain changes, our need changes as well. And this is also part of the architecture of learning. In here, you can see what parts of the brain are changing the most and how personality develops in different stages of our life. So for example, if we're designing an early years space, a kindergarten for children, their brain is transforming to understand emotions, and memory needs to start developing little by little. That's why we have what's called the children amnesia, okay? Because the brain is not ready to record information, so it has to get ready. It needs to mature, okay? That's why having, for example, socializing areas in kindergartens doesn't make much sense, because all the children don't exist for these young kids. Most important things are related to sensory aspects. And then when we grow older, like for example, when we're at university, and then the areas of our brain from the prefrontal cortex and from the auditory cortex, speaking, having conversation, following up with other people what we're saying, culturally engaging with others is fundamental. So as you see, we're always learning, but we need to learn different skills, and the space needs to answer and to provide facilities that help the people using the space mature in the way they need to mature, okay? They need to respond, the space needs to respond to the needs of the humans that use the space. We have very little time in this webinar, but I wanted to share with you 3 really important facts about school design and the brain. These are 3 facts we learned from when we were doing the research for the book we published last year. The first fact comes from the head research study from University of Salford, which was published in 2015, which is more than 10 years ago. And it says that 16% of a child's learning outcomes depend on the design of the school. So they know already that the design of the school has an impact on the learning performance. And the aspect they discovered that had the most impact were the light, temperature, air quality, flexibility, ownership, color, and complexity. This study is very well recommended, actually, so you can see what methodology they used to create the study. It's a reference in all this. Second fact is this paper from Erickson and his team, in which they explain how they discover that the human brain can grow new neurons. Before this, we thought that the human brain had a certain amount of neurons, and we would either die with that amount of neurons or that amount of neurons would little by little decrease. Well, they have found neurons younger than the human brain, okay? So we do produce new neurons, which is a good thing. But actually, let me tell you something. Having new neurons is good, but we need to have them connected with other neurons, because otherwise, why do we want them, right? So connection is crucial, okay? And that's what learning is, this connection of neurons. And then the third fact, and this one is the most important one, is that enriched environments are the ones that produce new neurons. It's been very deeply studied in mice, the difference between a standard environment and an enriched environment. If you've been to my lectures and my conferences, I've been speaking about this for many years, how this has been studied in mice. But now we're making an effort to bring this theory into learning spaces for humans. And this is what we're sharing, and this is our core of research at Kidzink. Because even a mouse needs good design. So what did we do? We carried the most extensive research on applied neuroarchitecture that has ever been done. And we created what we're presenting today to you, which is the enriched environment model. Understanding how space supports learning and well-being. We organized scientific evidence that sheds light on what special attributes contribute to learning outcomes, from sensory aspects to social-emotional aspects, and in between we've got motor and cognitive activity. So let me dive into the enriched environment model a little bit more so you understand what it is. At Kidzink, we use research to create knowledge. We apply the knowledge, then we design and we evaluate our designs. And that's the research we're doing. So this flywheel, this evidence-based flywheel is the one we're using to make sure that we're informing our designs with scientific evidence. We organize knowledge in these 4 different realms, the learning through space dimensions. As I said, first we've got the sensory cues, then we have cognitive and activity and motor responses. These 2 happen almost simultaneously. And then we've got the social-emotional interaction. This comes from on one hand, the enriched environment model of mice, okay, the enriched environments that they were designing for mice, but it also comes from the World Health Organization, in which they say that well-being has 3 different fields. You can have sensory well-being, physiological well-being and social-emotional well-being. But we divided physiological well-being in motor and cognitive, because motor and cognitive activity have different neuronal networks. That's why. So that's why we've got these 4 different fields, these 4 different areas that we evaluate individually. And they're organized from basic neuronal processing to more complex. So actually, in Beyond the Box book and in our research that we're publishing, we did one single research. We had 2 different surveys in Spanish and English. We surveyed more than 250 teachers because we asked them about their needs in the classroom, because we do study the user. That's where information comes from, by the way. And we went through more than 1,000 designs that we have done at Kidzink. And the result was these 4 dimensions with 31 quality factors and one single model to define the schools we design using scientific evidence. Now you see that these are the 4 different areas, and in each area you've got the different quality factors. The quality factors are called like that because they explain us what's the quality of the space. And we actually, when we design, and these are projects done by our team, we pay attention to all these different quality factors and up to what extent they appear. So how is neuroscience informed, and how is neuroscience informing our design, and how do we transform this knowledge into all budgets learning environment? Well, with our teams, we've got many kinds of workshops where we develop these kind of tools, and we evaluate our designs, and we spot where this scientific evidence appears and up to what extent. And we do this systematically to make sure that our designs are reaching the top level when it comes to science. We are developing many different kinds of tools, and as I usually say to my students as well, that this information is to be published in scientific journals in the next month. So be patient, because science takes time. This is not fast. This is slow, because we want to make sure that we're measuring accurately everything we're producing. But the module is actually out and you can use it. To finish, what I'm going to do right now, I've chosen a few of our quality factors with the scientific paper, so you see where they come from and how we have applied it into some designs. So for example, one of our quality factors is the acoustic design. And at Kidzink, we have acoustics, which is our own brand, to produce acoustic materials, and we embed them in the design. And this comes from a research that actually sheds light on how important acoustic is when it comes to learning. A classroom with poor acoustic quality is going to impede proper learning and proper social-emotional interaction. So that's why we care a lot about the acoustics of our schools, and not only about the classrooms. This is part of a canteen of one of our projects, and we use the acoustic solution together with the rest of the design. And you can see here, this is one of our quality factors, the acoustic design. It appears in the acoustic material in here. Then we have another quality factor that is very interesting, which is called sensory threshold. Having a sensory threshold means that between, for example, a corridor and a classroom, you need to have a buffer space. So we don't enter directly to a classroom, okay? This is extremely important for neurodivergent students. Sometimes this sensory threshold can be found in breakout areas, okay? Like for example, in here. Another quality factor, this is understand in the realm of cognitive activity, is differentiated ceiling heights. There is a lot of evidence on how different heights of ceiling have an impact on performance. And then we use these different heights of ceilings to produce and to create different atmospheres. So the body knows it's in a different kind of space. Excuse me. Another quality factor, curved shapes. There is a lot of evidence, for example, this paper by Oshin Vartanian's team, in which they say that we've got a preference for curvilinear spaces. And we use this to create our designs as well. So we make sure that some curved areas and so curved shapes appear in the space as well. Again, this is a canteen, so we apply scientific evidence in the classroom, but also in corridors, breakout spaces, playgrounds, everywhere in our projects. Another quality factor, seating options. This is very interesting because having different seating options in a classroom environment has positive impact in performance as well. So we make sure that children can choose where to sit, okay, depending on where they are. And then together with this, we have scale adjusted to the user. There are papers that actually explain us how the scale and the size of the space, when it matches the size of the student, helps them gain autonomy. And if you're a teacher right now and you're listening to us, you can know how important this is. So the child or the teenager can take care of what they're going to do. And this is way better when the space has his or her scale, is the same, the size they need. And I know some of you may say right now, well, this is obvious. And yeah, some of the things, many of the things are obvious, but we sometimes forget when we're designing, we forget about them. So what we did with the enriched environment model is that we put all of them together. So we make sure we don't miss them. That's the fundamental and the different thing we're doing. And actually, this can be applied to all budgets school. That's why I said at the beginning that a space that is designed with the enriched environment model does not necessarily need to look different. This is not a matter of luxury. It's a matter of paying attention to the detail and how learning happens in the environment. We're reaching our end with the social-emotional quality factors. I've chosen two of my favorite ones because these are the ones we need the most in today's schools. First one is prospect and refuge, which is the need humans have to feel, like hugged by the space. But at the same time, we need to be able to see far beyond where we are at. It's also good for our eyes so they rest. So having spaces in our schools where not only children and teenagers, but also teachers can sit down and feel protected in their back, but also with a wide perspective of what's happening, it's very positive, especially for well-being. But again, this can also be applied in play areas, for example. And here we've got like this little tent and the house, and we can have someone in there that maybe needs to be provided with this feeling of, feeling hugged or feeling covered by the space while they're into somewhere, but they can see outside of this place. And then the last quality factor I'm going to share with you today is the amphitheater style layout. We can see this a lot in many classrooms nowadays, and very often we're requested to have amphitheater style layout in a classroom, but we always say, okay, this is positive, but where do we place this? And we're using it a lot in libraries, in playgrounds, so people and children can sit down in a disposition in which they can see each other's faces. This is also interesting inside of the classrooms, so the students can see each other's faces and gestures and emotions, because we recognize emotions through the face, okay? So this kind of layout is very positive for the social-emotional connection between students and teachers. So, we truly believe that well-being is the next premium in education, and that's why we have created all this work and this research, and that's why we're sharing it with you today. Beyond the Box is the book in which all this is explained, and with this series of webinars, we're sharing it as a global movement because we want to connect school design with student and teacher well-being and learning outcomes from everybody. It's a scientific model to be used and applied in all the schools. So remember, you'll be able very soon to get the book, but this is not just a book, because this book is transforming schools all around the world, and we're actually doing a movement. So I don't know if there are any questions now. Probably there are. If you want to type them in the chat. Because I cannot see now here. I'm having a look to the chat. Now I can see you because I was speaking before and I couldn't see you. How did it go? Okay. I can see Peter asking, any good examples of how can you introduce technology into spaces to give them a different dimension? We've also worked with immersive learning environments, which is a great way to interact and to give students multiple spaces in one single space. So that would be a great way to introduce technology into spaces. Although there is a lot of evidence that actually says why learning with your hands is more efficient than with technological devices. So we always support active pedagogies. But of course, we need to, before we do the design of a school, we need to understand with the client what kind of methodology is going to be used and what are the ways teachers like to teach and to make their students engage with the knowledge they need to acquire. I can see, well, we've got a question here. Can this model be applied to other spaces, not just schools? Most of it, because we apply it also to outdoor spaces, and I cannot say much because this is going to be published in a book in a scientific journal next year. But the answer is yes. For already built schools, what is the most urgent aspect to change to ensure the well-being of the users? What we're seeing right now in the project we're demanding, I think acoustics is the most urgent thing. Acoustics together with the air quality and the temperature. But acoustics is extremely urgent. We've got here another question. If a school could only change one thing about their design tomorrow, what would you tell them to do? Oh, that's a really good question. Okay, first thing is that I will never say one thing to change in all the schools. So first we will need to observe the school. Okay, this is something that is usually missed in the designs I see. After observing and after making many observations in many different schools, again, acoustics is one thing I would say they have to change. But you know what? Before anything, I will suggest them to get rid of everything they don't use. I've seen so many schools full of clutter, old pieces of furniture, broken things. I've even seen broken books in schools. So first thing is to have a neat space to be aware of what we actually have. And then after that, depending on the school, sometimes changing the furniture is urgent, and some other times making an acoustic adjustment to some of the spaces is fundamental. Thank you for the question. Laura, in your experience, what are the most common mistakes still being made at schools design despite current neuroscience research? There was a very similar question of someone who filled in to come to the webinar. I think the most common mistake is that they don't pay attention to the user and they don't pay attention to the teaching methodology that is going to be used. So they try to create flexible spaces, like open spaces with very beautiful things, but then they're not functional when I'm a teacher as well. I've been a high school teacher for 3 years, and personally, if I were giving an open landscape with a cave and a slide and this in a traditional classroom, I'll probably get a traditional classroom because I'm more familiar with it and I can know how to organize it in a way that supports many different methodologies. Whereas if we do a space that is wide too open, sometimes teachers cannot do what they aim to do. So listening to the teachers is the first thing. And that's actually why we started our research with the questionnaire to teachers. That actually, if any of you wants to have it, you can write us on Instagram and we can share with you the survey we did to the teachers. We've got 5 more minutes, okay? I'm gonna answer 2 more questions. There's so many questions. My God, that's so good. What texture or tactile experience have you found to be impactful in young children? I'm referring to the impact of using hands and the sense of touch. Okay, when we talk about young children, we need to expose them to a variety of textures. And actually, sometimes when we think of textures in early years, we think of the hands, but you know what? The best way to touch things when you're a child, is with your feet. So giving them the opportunity to walk barefoot in different kind of surfaces with different temperatures is actually really good because their body is learning about materials unconsciously. Okay, but again, we need to study the user because depending on the sensory profile of our user, the amount of sensory materials has to be properly selected. Okay, we've got more questions here. Is there a scope for formalizing this policy-wise? Do you think this could really help? Absolutely, Rasha. This is a really good question as well. This should definitely become part of the, of decision makers. And we're actually working with many different decision makers from different countries. And I believe this will eventually be part of politics sometimes because it's a responsibility as well. Taking care of people through the environment is something that is doable and it's a reality right now. So I think we will see it. Yeah, and it is possible. Okay, well, 2 more minutes. You can write down your questions. I can see some people with a hand up. Still, maybe it's from the question I did before. If you've got any more questions, so I can reply. We've got Eliani Garcia. Is there a teaching methodology who has shown better result in early children's learning? That's a difficult question because it depends on the kind of child. And I don't want to answer in a personal way because I think that I'll try to answer this. So the teacher needs to be smart enough, and we need to, when we're teachers, we need to study a lot to have a broad, like a wide set of methodologies. So depending on our student, we provide them with what they need to learn. In Beyond the Box book, we cover the universal learning design, which is in order to teach one thing, we need to, as teachers, we need to provide the students with different means, different ways of providing information. So, and this is connected with the multiple intelligences of Howard Gardner. Maybe you're familiar with this too. And then in any case, the environment needs to support this, which is what we do at Kidzink. Harsha, okay, many educational environments are becoming increasingly large and complex. From a neuroscience perspective, how do we scale and wayfinding influence children's sense of safety, independence, belonging, cognitive load? Are there specific design strategies that help large schools feel more? Yes, Harsha, to your question, the answer to your question is in the enriched environment model, actually. Okay, now it would be great. Now we need to finish, okay? So it would be wonderful if you tell us what topic should we cover for our next webinar. We have a few more webinars coming on. Can you text right in the chat, what would you like us to cover? You can drop your ideas in the chat, or you can also drop your ideas in our Instagram account. We'll have a few posts about this. I can see Sana wants us to give a talk about hospitals and healthcare buildings. Maybe how do you balance evidence-based neuroscience with budget constraints in real educational projects? Actually, this is something we're very good at because we take care of all kinds of budget. In what ways can practicing architects help do research in neuroarchitecture to add knowledge? Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure sharing this session with you today. Follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram to get to know more information and to get to know when we will be releasing the book that's going to be very, very, very soon on sale. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.